Where do we begin? What do you think? Was he on the plane? Was he not? Did Putin order that thing to be shot out the sky? Was there a bomb on board, or is he on a beach in Panama with a pina colada?
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me on. Well, I'm pretty certain he probably was on that plane, and I don't think there are very few people who do not believe that actually Putin was behind it. Putin is well known for taking out the opposition. Litvinenko in London back in 2006, and Sergei Skripal, the double agent in Salisbury, where I'm talking to you from. So those who oppose him, they take him out. And Prigozhin led the mutiny of the Wagner group, this mercenary army that Putin has been paying for, actually the most effective part of the Russian army. But that mutiny 2 months ago, Putin vowed to take revenge on anybody who opposed him. So it's no surprise that Prigozhin's dead. In fact, lots of people are surprised that he has lasted so long. But it's a bit incongruous. Why blow this aeroplane up in Moscow in the skies? All the oligarchs who are trapped in Moscow because they can't go anywhere are now probably terrified to get in their own private jets. So I think there's a lot to come out of this. And I'm sure that Prigozhin kept a lot of dirt and intelligence on Putin, which we are likely to see on social media in the coming weeks, which will, I expect, put further angst on the Kremlin.
I mean, what we're not talking about much is the fact that it wasn't just Prigozhin who went down, but essentially all of the top brass of Wagner were on that same plane. And I was reading earlier that it's all actually written in their organisational rules, if you will, that if anyone takes out the top dogs, there will be some form of revenge. And there's talk now of a further mutiny or a march on Moscow. Do you think that's possible? Or do you think that essentially what Putin has potentially managed to do, of course Russia haven't taken credit for this, is to gut that organisation so as to make it toothless and powerless to react?
No, I think Putin's really made a big mistake here, because you've got between 5,000 and 8,000 fighters. These are mercenaries, these Wagner people. Most of them are criminals, murderers and rapists taken out of Russian jails. And my experience with mercenaries, they don't care much who pays the bill. And they've already threatened revenge. The two key people in Wagner are now dead, and some of the others. So, but Prigozhin was not a soldier. You know, he's got to the top by being an oligarch and being a cook to Putin. So to run an organization like Wagner, I expect there's some very powerful lieutenants in the background who are now tapping their knuckles in Belarus and Africa, seeing what to do next. And how ironic it would be if somebody actually paid them to create mayhem in Russia. And that's not beyond the bounds of possibility. We're seeing how the special operations that Ukraine is conducting. Just today, the Ukraine government's reporting a special forces mission in Crimea that's had great effect. So I think the fact that Putin has done this, and Prigozhin, although not a trained military officer, was one of his most effective field officers. And yesterday, Putin also dismissed General Surovikin, who was the architect of his operations in Syria and the only successful general, Russian general in Ukraine. He's now got rid of the two most effective commanders he had. He's left it to Shoigu and Gerasimov, who are the current generals, who are actually sort of desk wallers, if you like, desk jockeys. All their medals are for non-war fighting. So I think in the strategic point, you know, he might have made the point that anybody opposes him, I'm going to take out. But actually, I think he's severely weakened the Russian military fighting in Ukraine. And he's really upset, I expect, the oligarchs who are getting bored of being stuck in their dachas or their shelters in Moscow, unable to go to their yachts and villas in the Mediterranean.
I mean, one thing that has always fascinated me, or fascinates me for a long time, is that the Wagner Mercenaries operations abroad. I mean, they've really sort of got a lot of publicity, and then the name is now known largely around the world ever since the invasion of Ukraine. But they have, of course, this lawless band of grisly fighters been doing a lot of Russia's dirty work overseas for quite some time, in Syria, of course, when they were backing up Assad's troops, and then most recently in Niger, where they essentially helped to precipitate that coup. Putin has used the mercenaries quite heavily, hasn't he, for geopolitical work overseas. So what then happens now? How does he keep control or maintain influence in these countries without his henchmen?
Well, I think he's going to find it very difficult. You know, mercenaries are nothing new. You know, even this country in the bygone centuries have used mercenaries abroad, and Putin has been prepared to pay people to do it for him. The Russian military itself, what us military people have been staggered is how inept and how poor the Russian military are. So actually, if Putin wanted a job done, he needed to buy it in, as it were. And that's where Wagner came in. Prigozhin became unbelievably wealthy by doing that. But now he doesn't have a military capability that he can replicate in Africa and elsewhere to do his dirty work. He actually needs them in Ukraine to try and shore up his failing military. So I think that's why one is very surprised that Prigozhin has been taken out. I think Putin may well look back on this in the weeks and years to come as being really one of the final nails in Putin's coffin. I don't think it needs many more nails for his sort of mafioso type government to fall.
Yeah, the Sopranovs, as I started calling them. How do you think Putin is going to play this? Because what you say is really interesting. I mean, this guy, Prigozhin, was at one point his personal chef. I mean, from flipping hot dogs to go into prison to then leading his merry band of, ex-con army. He had an incredible rise to power and was incredibly close to Putin. It seems everyone believes, and you can understand why, that Putin has had to get this guy gone because he started to essentially have the upper hand over the Kremlin in many respects and was calling the shots. But how on earth is Putin going to play this? Could he potentially use it as some sort of false flag and claim that other people have carried out the attack? What's he going to be saying, both internationally and domestically, to try and control the narrative?
Well, you're right. I mean, even today, some of his henchmen claiming on the BBC Today programme that it was Ukraine special operations who shot down this jet in Moscow. I mean, to me, that is complete folly on Putin's behalf. You know, if the Russians believe that Ukrainians can get into Moscow and shoot down their jets, you know, quite frankly, there's virtually nothing that they can't do. So again, I really think Putin is backed into a corner. Prigozhin was getting too close to power, and Russia is run by these incredibly powerful and evil people like Prigozhin and Putin. And Sorovkin, the guy who's disposed today, was known as General Armageddon. I saw of a lot of him in Syria, and he's been the architect of the Russian way of attacking hospitals and schools and killing civilians. So hopefully people are realizing quite what an unpleasant and evil regime this is. And also, I think the Russian people, who only last week, Russian media reported that 250,000 Russian men had died in Ukraine, and that is beginning to sink in. Russian mums were hoping that their sons would come back from Ukraine in triumph and glory. They're not. They're coming back in boxes, and that is beginning to have an impact. So that's why I think this whole situation is remarkable, because I think it weakens Putin's position rather than anything else. But the evil is on show, and as soon as that evil is got rid of, and whoever replaces him might well be worse, but they are not going to have an army to threaten us in the West for a generation or two.
Well, that must be good news indeed, but less good news for the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, who was arrested on espionage charges at the end of March. Now, he was due to potentially be released today, but with a brief hearing on Thursday, the court ordered Gershkovich should remain in jail until the 30th of November. This is a 31-year-old American journalist being held on spying charges, and the first one actually to be done so since the Cold War, in fact. I mean, it's bad news, but Biden has said he could well be open to a prisoner negotiation, which would see the release of Russian intelligence officials. Is that essentially the reason why Russia are intent on holding on to this poor man?
Undoubtedly, and I think in the cloak and dagger world of spies and how they're dealt with, it might seem incongruous to the general public, but this has gone on for millennia. Spies do what they do. And if Putin can get some leverage out of this and swap this guy for a Russian spy, then that will be it. But we've seen with people like Alexei Navalny, the opposition leader, who's really guilty of nothing, in jail now for the rest of his life, along with some others. This is the way these people operate in Russia. And it's, you know, the public should realize this, which is why it's so important that the British government and NATO does all it can to kick the Russians out of Ukraine as quickly as possible so that we can all get back to some sort of normality.